Today, I'm excited to have Chief Bryan Rippee of the Texas Highway Patrol with me on the briefing room. Chief Rippee began his career with the Texas Department of Public Safety in 1996 and has held leadership roles across the state before being appointed Chief of Patrol in December of 2023. He's a decorated U.S. Army veteran who has had the honor of standing guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington National Cemetery. Chief Rippee is a graduate of the FBI National Academy and the Northwestern University Police Staff and Command School. As chief, he oversees and directs all operations for the over 3,500 troopers of the Texas Highway Patrol. Chief Rippee, thanks for joining me today. I think you know how this works. We'll go through 3 stories that have appeared in the weekly briefing. We'll get your perspective as a law enforcement leader about these stories. And then you'll just have a conversation to learn a little bit more about you and the agency that you lead. Does that sound good?
Sounds great. I'm excited. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, let's get started. Headline number 1 from CBS News. Police officer's death in Lorain, Ohio marks the latest and growing trend of ambush attacks against law enforcement. Lorain, Ohio police officer Philip Wagner was killed in an ambush while on lunch break with 2 other officers who were also shot. And this is part of a troubling national trend of officers being targeted in surprise attacks. At least 50 officers have been shot in ambush-style incidents so far this year, according to CBS News and the National Fraternal Order of Police, putting 2025 on track to surpass last year's total of ambush attacks, which hit a record number of 80. Now, the overall number of officers shot in the line of duty, all incidents, also remains high, with 166 shot and 21 killed in the first half of 2025, also according to national FOP data. And many of these attacks, like in Lorain, Ohio, occur with little to no warning and heightened risk, which heightens the risk for officers out on the street. So, Chief, thankfully, officers shot and killed is trending downward from last year, and we covered this in our first show with Chief Davis from Fairfax County, but it is still higher than pre-pandemic levels. And now we have this disturbing trend of ambush assaults against officers going back. And even since this article was written, we've seen 3 more assaults. And the National FOP actually issued a statement 2 days ago, outraged at these ambush assaults on police officers, noting that there have been 10 officers shot within a 6-day period. So they're love to get your perspective and your thoughts on this increase in ambush assaults.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, what a tragedy. You know, our hearts go out to the families of Officer Philip Wagner and Peter Gale and Brent Payne, as well as the entire Logan Police Department. These are not just officers. These are people's sons, brothers, neighbors, and guardians of their community. So their sacrifice and service will never be forgotten, and our prayers are with their families and their colleagues as they deal with these tragedies. But as the rise in ambush style attacks on law enforcement, this is deeply troubling. These are calculated violent acts that target police officers simply for wearing a badge or fulfilling their oath or their duty to protect and serve their communities. And when these officers are ambushed while performing routine duties such as conducting traffic enforcement or responding to calls or just simply sitting in their patrol unit or having lunch, that doesn't just represent a brazen attack on that individual officer, but on the rule of law itself. So this is deeply disturbing. We've had similar incidents of this in Texas. Out of these tragedies, we try to really look at the circumstances and then debrief our officers, share intelligence with our partners at the state and federal and local levels to try to be more proactive, to try to mitigate these opportunities for people to attack our officers through training and just really good situational awareness. And a lot of times it's just having these discussions like, hey, what would you do? And hey, that's a bad place to park your car, as officers are integrating with each other. But we try to share intelligence. We try to be aware of people that have made, threats through social media and other sources. And we take those very serious. Here in Texas, with the Department of Public Safety, we're a complete state police agency. You know, we have our highway patrol troopers, we have our Texas Rangers, criminal investigation divisions, our pilots, and then a huge civilian component to our agency. And so, you know, we have a threat to life program that we started years ago where our rangers and our troopers and our agents respond to these threats, whether they're coming from citizens, whether they're coming from social media or whatever. And so we dedicate a lot of our resources towards these threat to life situations, instances where we come across them. We want to do everything we can to mitigate these situations. And I'll tell you, I'll brag on our governor and lieutenant governor and our state legislators. I'm not aware of any other state legislative body that not only actively supports law enforcement, but does everything they can to fund equipment, technology, training to help our law enforcement officers to be the best they can be, because our citizens deserve that. They deserve a very professional, modernized police force. But when our lieutenant governor and our legislators dedicated millions of dollars to put ballistic windshields and ballistic glass and ballistic panels into our state trooper vehicles, that was a huge commitment to safety, not only to the officers, but to their families that worry about the officers when they're out there patrolling. And, you know, we've used these patrol cars in a number of situations to not only for our own trooper safety, where we've actually taken fire and those ballistic windshields and ballistic panels have worked exactly as they should to protect our officers. But there's many times that we respond with our local partners to these barricaded subjects, these active shooter situations, and we're able to utilize these patrol cars as like a mobile field force to get close to the situation and actually pull wounded officers or civilians out and mitigate the risk to these other public and officers. So this is a great tool that we have here in Texas. We're deeply grateful to our legislators for providing these resources for our troopers. But, you know, we stand unwavering in our mission to protect the people of Texas, and we will continue to honor all of our fallen by remaining vigilant, be committed to upholding safety and the dignity of every community we serve. And we just have to continue to train to have good perceptual vigilance and to work with all of our agencies to try to mitigate a lot of this. But a big part of this, I feel like, especially as law enforcement leaders, we have to work with our community leaders, our lawmakers, and especially our public to unite in support for police officers. We have to be strong and speak out against anti-police rhetoric. We have to reinforce the values of service and duty and accountability and really be a louder voice when it comes to this type of rhetoric and this type of violence against our law enforcement officers. Because we have to remember, Mike, if somebody's willing to walk up to a police officer and execute them, because that's essentially what they're doing, is they're executing law enforcement officers. What's to stop them from doing that to any other routine civilian or citizen or anybody else? And obviously we've seen attacks on lawmakers. We've seen threats that are increasing against our elected officials. I just saw on the news the other day where, you know, a city councilman was burned by somebody. I mean, it's just, it's disturbing where we've gotten to in society that kind of behavior is happening more regularly.
Yeah, and first I should say thank you for, you know, honoring and those officers have been shot and killed. I apologize because I hate to be so clinical and read the data because we're talking about lives and we're talking about families, and it doesn't matter if the numbers go way down. One life lost or one officer who does not go home to their family is one too many. So I thank you for recognizing those officers who did lose their life in Ohio and some of the others that are out there as well. A couple things. One, I don't know of many agencies, as you mentioned, you have political support from your governor and the state legislature that have the ballistic windshield and ballistic panels like Texas DPS does. Are you aware? Is this unique to Texas?
I'm not aware of any large agency. Obviously, the United States Secret Service has been, have had these resources and this equipment, based on their dignitary protection stuff for a long time. But as far as local or state agencies, I'm not aware of it, and I can tell you that I wish we could do this for every law enforcement officer's vehicle in the nation. I mean, it is just such a game changer, and it's kind of hard to explain, but I know that I've had troopers that have responded to some active shooting type events where they've taken rounds through their vehicles, through their windshields, and we've had some of them that have been hit. Unfortunately, some of them have been tragically killed. But when you're responding to these incidents and you know that you have that extra level of protection, it is reassuring that you can go in there and get to where you need to be strategically to address that threat or to rescue people. And you've got your level of survivability increases a lot. So I'm not aware of it, but it really is an investment.
It's amazing, absolutely amazing. I mean, again, shows in terms of having the political leadership to support an agency for things that they need that seems like a huge cost, but how do you put a dollar value on saving lives and protecting your troopers and deputies and officers out there on the street? You also mentioned this Threat to Life program. Maybe just give me a sort of a brief on what the Threat to Life program is.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got several ways that people can make us aware that they have information that somebody might be trying to harm people, and we have an app that we have here at DPS that we push out statewide, and I'm sure a lot of other agencies use that to collect data where people can make anonymous reports. Obviously, they can call 911. They can stop by their local police departments and speak to officers, or just even seeing a trooper or police officer or deputy on the side of the road. They can make those outcries, and so those get funneled into our fusion center here at the DPS. That's run by our Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division of the Texas Department of Public Safety. And so we have analysts 24 hours a day that are looking through this stuff, trying to gather more information using open source reporting, whatever they can come across. And then this information is very quickly sent out to the local offices where the originators of these threats are believed to be. And then we'll have our criminal investigation agents or rangers or even sometimes troopers go out and make contact with them to evaluate and to make sure that all these leads are being checked, and then where appropriate, making arrests, putting people or even emergency committals on people if that's warranted, to try to mitigate that threat to people. And it's been very successful. We had an instance in Lubbock not too long ago where a mother actually reported her son that he was going to create a mass casualty event using a firearm. And when the Lubbock Police Department and our agents all working collaboratively, but when we responded to that, he was in a hotel room and he had automatic or semi-automatic weapons with a cache of ammunition. And he was one step away from doing that. So kudos to his mom.
Yeah.
For having the mental courage to call law enforcement on that situation. So we've seen some success with that. You've got to take every situation seriously. You can't just say, that's probably a hoax or that's probably not going to happen. You have to take all these threats very serious and provide resources to exhaust all investigative leads to make sure that these horrible, horrible things aren't happening.
And I think you also hit upon another, even going back to the being well funded and having politicians support their local or county or state law enforcement agency, like to do everything you just described, to have a fusion center, to have analysts in those fusion centers, to have the resources to go out to if there is a threat, like it takes resources in it. And that is something that when you hear anything around defund or you see police budgets going down, you think like these things can happen unless you don't have sort of this foundation in place. And last thing, more of a comment, and then we'll move on to story number 2, +1 on the anti-police rhetoric and the conversation with community members and the public. And that's the reason. One reason we started the show was to cut through sort of the noise that's out there and the things that get the most clicks, because as we discussed in the very first show, confidence in police has risen post George Floyd, even among Black Americans. So, and if you look at the numbers, they're quite striking. And we discussed this with Chief Davis a couple of weeks ago. So, like, the public does support the police for the most part. There's always work to be done, but if you just pay attention to social media or watch what's on the news, like, you don't get that impression, and then just those loudest voices come through that you think there's so much anti-police rhetoric out there, and then that rhetoric can influence people that perhaps have suffering from mental health disorders and other things. All right, let's move on to story number 2. And this one is from a local news station out of Oklahoma, News 9. Oklahoma Highway Patrol to shift troopers out of Oklahoma City and Tulsa metro areas. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol announced plans to reassign troopers from the Oklahoma City and Tulsa metro areas to more rural parts of the state beginning in November. The Highway Patrol says metro police departments in Oklahoma City and Tulsa are well equipped to take over highway and interstate patrols in those urban areas. Their goal is to focus their limited resources, the Highway Patrol, that is, Oklahoma Highway Patrol, on highways and interstates with higher traffic volumes, but fewer local law enforcement officers to provide better statewide coverage. Obviously, some local chiefs have expressed concern. They warn that with fewer troopers in these metro regions, their own officers will be stretched thin, potentially leading to longer response times and more demands, et cetera. So, Chief, I'm not looking to dig into what's happening in Oklahoma. We did cover this in last week's weekly briefing, but more just get your perspective on the challenges of balancing, state police or highway patrol agency that's got to cover the entire state versus those competing demands around cities and larger counties.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know of anywhere that people will say, we have too many police officers here. Like, we really just got to get rid of some of these police officers. We just have too many, it's really the opposite. We don't have enough law enforcement officers, nationwide. We're facing recruiting shortages and everybody's trying to beef up their recruiting efforts so yes, there's not enough police officers anywhere, and I can definitely understand why those chiefs would be concerned about a partner agency moving resources and that's a struggle that we all have based on our shortfalls with our hiring gaps and recruiting but I'll tell you this, that we feel strongly here at the Department of Public Safety that we have a duty that we have to align our personnel and resources based on the most pressing threats that are facing our communities. It doesn't matter what your zip code is. You deserve to live in a crime-free, safe area. And, we all law enforcement agencies want the same thing. We want to combat crime. We want to lower crime. We want people to feel safe, not only in their homes and their neighborhoods, but in their places of employment, when they're out shopping or spending time. So we're all wanting the same thing. The challenge is where do we take limited resources and where do we apply them where we can get the most bang for our buck, so to speak. Here in Texas, we've done the same thing. In the late 1990s, early 2000s, we moved a lot of our troopers out of our larger metropolitan areas like Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, and we moved them more into our rural areas where our law enforcement resources are very thin. Most of Texas is really patrolled and law enforcement officer agencies are a very low number. I mean, less than 20 officers make up an agency. So, there's a misconception that everywhere we have these big, robust law enforcement agencies with unlimited resources and people, and that's not true. But so we've done that. We've kind of started migrating back into the bigger cities. And again, our legislators have been very generous. We've been increasing our number of personnel, our FTE counts, our full-time equivalent personnel along the border during the border crisis, and we've really surged the number of people that we've hired in the last 10 years, and that continues to look like a good trend for us. So we've been fortunate that we can start moving resources back into the bigger cities, not to take over policing, because the way it works in Texas, our locals own the incident, they own the event. We're there to supplement and to support them. And we've done a lot of it, not just patrolling traditional highway patrol work in these metropolitan areas, but where we're really teaming up is where we're seeing the violent crime task forces, where we have these robbery squads, where we have surges in gang activity and criminal activity. And so we're actually bringing resources back into our bigger cities to partner up with our local and federal partners to address those threats where we've seen them. But having said that, we know here in Texas that some of our most dangerous roadways aren't in urban centers. They're actually in rural areas, and again, where our local departments are stretched very thin, and backup can be miles away. So we have an obligation to support our locals in those smaller areas and provide our citizens the same type of police services that you would get in those bigger areas. So, again, just like you said, Mike, we're not here to comment on the tactical or strategic decisions that the Oklahoma Highway Patrol is making. I'm sure they've put careful consideration in that. But one of the things that we have to do is we got to use data. Our ability to collect data through automated services and analysts to look at that and to do some predictive modeling on where we should deploy our resources and when we can get the most effective results out of those resources. More agencies are really doing that. We do that here in Texas, and
it's one reason you would know. It's one reason you would know where your most deadly highways are to put your resources.
Absolutely. And to me, you know what success looks like, Mike? If I get in a car with a trooper on any given highway at, let's say, 3:00 in the afternoon, and I can have a conversation with one of my troopers and say, so why are we here right now on this highway? And they can say, hypothetically, if I'm working this highway on Tuesday between the hours of 2 p.m. and 7 p.m., there's a 30% chance that somebody's not going to die in a fatality crash. That's what we should be doing. That's to me, that's what success looks like.
Love that. Love that. And again, like you said, we were not here questioning what's happening in Oklahoma. It's just an example of the challenges that state police and highway patrol leaders like yourself face across the country, and where you dedicate your resources. And like you said, in Texas, and I know elsewhere, looking at the data to make sure. I mean, you have a large part of your responsibility as a highway patrol agency is highway safety. So you're looking at the data to show you where your troopers to go. But I love that. If you get in a troop car and they know why they're there and can tell you that's unbelievable. All right, let's hit the final story.
Okay.
Headline number 3 from the Wall Street Journal. Texas highways have a new nighttime creature, autonomous trucks. Aurora Innovations autonomous trucks are now running night routes between Dallas and Houston, hauling food and dairy on Texas highways. This marks a major milestone for self-driving vehicles, which have mostly operated during the daytime or in clear weather. The trucks use advanced LiDAR sensors to see objects in the dark at distances greater than 3 football fields, and according to the article, giving them up to 11 extra seconds for the computer in the truck to react versus a human driver. Now, while these trucks can operate autonomously at night, as of right now, human drivers remain in the cab as a precaution. And there are competitors also operating driverless trucks, some of them fully unmanned in less populated areas and on leased roads in Texas. So proponents argue that autonomous trucks can boost safety and reliability and reducing risk tied to driver fatigue and distraction, 2 problems, and helping solve long-haul driver shortages, letting humans focus on more regional and local routes and giving them more predictable schedules. So, Chief, this technology, which is playing out in Texas, this technology could reshape not just the future of long-haul trucking, but with autonomous robo-taxis. I know you have those in Texas as well, and I've taken several Waymos. Those are rolling out in cities across the U.S. It could redefine how we think about driving and transportation on our nation's streets and highways. So I'd love to get your thoughts as a highway patrol leader, get your thoughts on the public safety perspective as we move to make perhaps a sort of driverless society.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of an exciting time, Mike, honestly, when you look at, not only this technology, but technology, just the flood of innovation with AI, and there's just so much going on and so many advancements. It's really kind of an incredible time to be in law enforcement and to be kind of on the bottom floor of really all this technology. So I think really, these recent developments in autonomous trucking represents both, not only innovation, but also a call for responsibility.
Hmm.
This isn't, I know these companies don't take this lightly as far as putting an unmanned or no human being into a cab of a 80,000 pound vehicle and sending it down the highway. But, Aurora's innovation with rolling out the self-driving trucks, they're now hauling freight between Dallas and Houston, to me is a major milestone. We've engaged closely with Aurora and other tech firms, our transportation agencies, our associations, the trucking operators, to really coordinate safety protocols and response planning. And to me, with this, law enforcement is the most successful when we collaborate. From not only from our local and federal partners, but our rule makers, our legislators, and industry. And there's a lot of smart people out there that again, we're all looking for the same type of goals. We want the safest highways that we can have. We want to reduce injury crashes and obviously people being killed on our highways. So we all, again, want the same things. And so I think when we collaborate and work together, early on to not only on the technology side, but for us as law enforcement, really on how do we respond, how do we interact with these vehicles on the side of the road, and develop very strong, robust plans to do that. We follow NHTSA's voluntary safety self-assessment guidelines. We work closely with our legislators' efforts like Senate Bill 2425 that establishes clear rules for driverless commercial vehicles in Texas. And, one of the big things I think too is really just being transparent and really what these vehicles can do, what they can't do. What do they do well? What do they not do well? How do they handle crashes and weather? We don't think about this, but these vehicles are designed that when they're involved in a vehicle crash, is they want to move off of the highway to try to clear the highway, which is great, right? I mean, we
Hmm.
like all of our drivers to clear the highways during crashes, but what happens if there's a car pinned underneath the rear axles? Do we want it to continue to keep driving? And and that, so really, they've really demonstrated that the smart technology, where they can mitigate, I guess these events that wouldn't be good. Like there's times you want to move off the highway, there's times you don't
Hmm.
want to move off the highway. So I think really, these fail-safe fallback procedures that companies are deploying, like you said, with the advanced sensors, including this long-range LiDAR cameras. I mean, they say they're capable of detecting obstacles up to 500 meters or more, even at nighttime. And the reaction times are give them an advantage over a human driver. But man, Texas is fast becoming really a proving ground for autonomous logistics. With Aurora, they're wanting. My understanding is they want to expand not only between Dallas and Houston, where they're going now with autonomous vehicles, but also El Paso to Phoenix by 2025. I think Bot Auto is also rolling out technology to drive routes between Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio. So, we'll see, but so far the relationships with industry that we have as first responders has been really good. They've been very transparent with us. We've worked together to design strategies and training for first responders, how to respond to these vehicles. But it definitely is an interesting time when it comes to technology and autonomous vehicles, Mike.
Well, I mean, this is the third show of the briefing room. We've had a chief, we've had a sheriff, now we have the head of a highway patrol. All three of you have said it's an exciting time to be in law enforcement or policing, given the times we're in with technology. It's just interesting that you said that as well. That's been a theme across the prior two shows. Now, I used to be the director of the IACP's S&P division. So that's State Provincial Division. That's all 49 state police agencies across the country, plus 3 in Canada. Note, Hawaii does not have a state police agency. And in 2011, we had the CEO of Aurora come speak to all the state police colonels about, because then he had just started the Google self-driving car division. So this is very fresh. And I remember sitting around the table with all those state police colonels back then. So it was 13, 14 years ago. And it seemed like science fiction when he described the world that was coming with autonomous driving. And here it is. It's a reality today. So,
Yeah.
but as you mentioned, like you're working in collaboration, and it will take new sort of models of enforcement and models of investigation and models of response that it's going to take working in collaboration with everyone involved as we move forward. Chief, with the time that we have left, I do have a few questions for you. So you lead over around 3,500 troopers, somewhere in that effect, somewhere around 3,500 troopers. You're a decorated Army veteran, as we covered in the intro. You have lived a life of service, for sure. Where does it all start? Like, where did this passion come from, and did you always want to be a trooper?
Wow, what a great question. Thanks, Mike. So it all started with my parents. My mom was an RN, so she, obviously served her community and worked to help people all her life, and she was a tremendous role model to me growing up. My father was an Army veteran. My grandfather was a World War II pilot. And I've always been interested in the military. I wasn't interested in law enforcement initially, but I've always been interested in the military. And so it was a no-brainer for me right out of high school that I wanted to serve my country, and had a great opportunity to do that through the United States Army. And I've been lucky my whole life. I wish that, I had this strategic 10-year vision of, where I was going to be. I really just was at the right place at the right time, and being selected to go to the Old Guard, and to serve at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And interesting enough, the reason I actually went into the Army to be an airborne ranger. And I told a recruiter, hey, I'd like to jump out of airplanes. And the recruiter looked at me and said, I've got a job for you. And I'm like, hey, sign me up. I'm good. That's all I want to do is jump out of airplanes, right? That's what happens when you're 18 years old and you're pretty inexperienced. But when I got to basic training, there was a recruiter for the military unit that's over the presidential escort and all the specialty units that the Army has there. And they show us a video, and they showed a video of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and a sentinel guarding the tomb. It was probably 10 or 15 seconds, wasn't very long. And I remembered when I was about 8 or 9 years old, my grandfather, again, who was a World War II B-17 pilot, I remember him showing us their trip to D.C., and he spent the entire time talking about the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and what the impression that made on him. And he couldn't believe that soldier stood out there and was so, their dedication and their commitment, and just how professional they were. And he just went on and on about it. And so when I saw that video, I'm like, that's what my grandfather was talking about. That's what I'm going to do. And so I changed my whole contract just to be a guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, because I knew my grandfather would be proud of me.
Wow.
And so I got that opportunity. I served 3 years at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And then that's where kind of law enforcement came in, Mike, because we were around the Secret Service quite a bit, because the president and vice president would come twice a year and would lay wreaths. And we'd have other VIPs from the world that would come and lay a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Well, they all recruited us, or tried to recruit us, because we all had top secret clearances so we could carry a weapon around the president. And so they knew we could pass their background, and so that we were, we were hireable. And so at the time, my wife said, "Look, that's great. You want to be in law enforcement." I'd kind of gotten the bug at that point. She just said, "I want to go back to Texas." And so I started looking around. I knew I wanted to work for a large agency, and I started looking around at Houston and Dallas, San Antonio, and the bigger agencies in Texas. But they all required at least 60 hours of college. Texas DPS was one of the few large agencies that I could find that would take my active duty military time and waive my college requirements. And so the more I started learning about the Texas Department of Public Safety, the Highway Patrol, the Texas Rangers, the mission, the history, the legacy, coming from the military, that's all important. We love history. We love being a part of something bigger than ourselves. And so Texas DPS was just a natural fit. I loved being in the Highway Patrol. I loved the work that the Highway Patrol did, and never had a desire to leave this division. And was just fortunate to be surrounded by some exceptional leaders at this agency that helped mentor and grow me. I never dreamed I'd be the chief of the Texas Highway Patrol. And what an honor it is.
Thank you for your service. And that is an amazing story. Texas DPS and the Highway Patrol have a special place in my heart. For those who don't know, the former Colonel, Steve McCraw, who just stepped down about within the year, he is the reason for all of this. When I was the S&P director, I used to send out a weekly email to all the colonels. And then when I left there, I stopped, and I saw Colonel McCraw at an IECP event, several years ago. And he goes, "You need to start doing that again." I was like, "Colonel, I'm not the S&P director. I don't have those emails." He goes, "You do it, and I'll help you." And so I think he blasted out my very first email to the entire Texas Department of Public Safety distribution list. And so every weekly briefing that goes out, I know there are hundreds, literally hundreds of personnel within Texas DPS to read the weekly briefing, which I take that very seriously when I send it out. So Texas DPS and the patrol there have a special place in my heart. Next question, something I know that you're very passionate about is troopers and officers and deputies struck on the side of the highway. Now, each year, somewhere around 8 to 10% of all line of duty deaths are from officers struck and killed on the side of the road. And as you and I have talked about before, that doesn't capture the full breadth of the problem. You have troopers in Texas you were telling me about that have suffered catastrophic injuries, and so they're not counted in that data. But I know this is something near and dear to your heart that you care about. So talk a little bit about the challenge and perhaps some ideas that you're thinking about to try to make, try to save lives.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. There's nothing worse than having an officer seriously injured or killed in the line of duty. It just as a law enforcement leader, you're losing a family member, obviously, and but not only that is and I'm sure a lot of leaders would share the same feeling that I have, is you start questioning, like, are we doing enough? Are we providing the right equipment, the right training? Can we be doing more? And you and I, we looked at when one of our troopers, when Derek was struck on the side of the road. It happens so often, and thank goodness Derek survived that. But he's still in rehab. Almost a year later, he hasn't come back to duty. Same with one of our other troopers, Austin. He is in long-term care, and he's getting better. Thank goodness. He's making some improvements, but his quality of life, both of their quality of lives have been just dramatically affected, and their family affected, either by intoxicated drivers or distracted drivers. And then, of course, we had Kevin that was killed right after I became the chief of the Highway Patrol. And, we kept, amongst ourselves here, our leadership team, we kept thinking there's so much technology. There's AI, and there's cameras, and there's predictive modeling, and it's like, why can't we have a system that provides some sort of early warning notice to an officer on the side of the road that, like, hey, you need to look up, like, somebody's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Back in the days when I was a trooper, a lot of times we rode as two-person units, right? We called it a lead trooper and a referred trooper, just because we didn't have enough cars for everybody, and that was just what we did back then. And once you cleared the vehicle on a traffic stop, the referred trooper's role was to watch traffic and to try to flag traffic over, or if somebody wasn't moving over, to let the lead trooper know, give them a, hey, watch for traffic. And so we think that, again, there's not an easy button for this, but we think with all the innovations in technology, all the equipment and technology that is going into patrol cars, surely there's some way that not only can we warn the officer that's on the side of the road, but also possibly change the light patterns, some audible alerts that can warn the public and the officer, like, you need to change what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And to my knowledge, all states have a move over and slow down law for first responders, and even here in Texas, we have it for our construction workers that are working on our highways. So we're really passionate about that. We've got some tremendous civilian partners in the technology that are also interested in that, because again, we're all focused on the same thing, is safety and bringing these officers home at the end of the night. And I don't know, what's possible, but we're definitely exploring options and seeing if we can make it a little more safer for our officers that are out on the highways working. And man, it's so important to us. And if you don't think it's important, go visit Austin in the hospital room, and go visit with his family or Kevin's family, after the funeral. And man, it's an important mission, and I'm excited to be a part of it on that ground floor. And hopefully we can do something with industry that really makes a difference in all law enforcement officers when they're out of their vehicle, or even sitting in their vehicle on the side of the road.
I mean, you would think if we can put an 80,000-pound truck on a highway and have it deliver fruit up and down the road, that we can figure this problem out as well to try to prevent the next Austin from happening.
Absolutely.
Texas DPS is hitting a major milestone.
Yes, we are.
Talk about that for a second.
So August will be our 90th year. We just recently honored our Texas Ranger Division. They a couple years ago, they entered their 200th year of service to the state of Texas as a law enforcement agency or branch, and of course they're a division of the Texas Department of Public Safety. And we're coming into our 90th year, and it really is. We're starting a campaign of 90 days for 90 years. We're really going to highlight the history, because again, we talked about history earlier with being in the Army and the military, but that's the foundation of our agency, the great men and women that have come before us that have really built a reputation of this agency and developed that foundation. I always tell young troopers, when you start off as a young trooper, you're working on somebody else's reputation. You're borrowing somebody else's reputation. So make sure you're making deposits in that reputation bank and not making withdrawals, because so many men and women have done such great things in the state for, as part of our agency. So we're going to celebrate all of our divisions, and it's not only the law enforcement side of our agency, it's the civilian side. Again, we are a complete, state police agency, but not only that, we've got our crime labs that are just exceptional scientists that do amazing work in DNA and crime scene and blood alcohol and other things. But we also have, most states have a DMV, but we actually have a driver's license division within the Texas Department of Public Safety. But all of the people that it really takes, there's more civilians than there are commissioned people in our agency, because that's what it takes to run a large agency. We're fixing to push over 13,000 employees here at the Texas Department of Public Safety, and actually over 50% of those are civilians. So it's a great time to be, at DPS, coming off the heels of our Texas Rangers 200th year anniversary and celebration, and transitioning right into our 90th, and we're really looking forward to our 100th anniversary in just 10 more years, and so I can't wait to be a part of the 90th and also celebrate our 100th.
Well, if they make a special edition Texas DPS cowboy boots, I'm going to have to get me a pair of those.
I will. We'll make that happen, Mike.
Last question before I let you go, and thank you for so much of your time. And I've asked all law enforcement leaders this. What, given your position and what you've done in your career, what's one public safety challenge that you see on the horizon that maybe we're not paying enough attention to?
Great question. I think it's kind of weird how things are cyclic, and we deal with a problem or an issue, and then it gets resolved, and we kind of just are always moving to the next problem, next issue. For DPS, I think one of the biggest things that we've got to look at is, again, the technology for that predictive modeling to understand where the crime patterns are, where traffic crashes are happening, and provide limited resources to those areas where we can provide the most effective policing that we can. One of the things that I've really struggled with being the chief of the Highway Patrol is probably all law enforcement officers, but I only have my field of view is within the Texas Highway Patrol, is we spend so much time on administrative taskings, from report writing to just a lot of things that are going on, but especially let's just focus on report writing. Is it takes a trooper, depending on the case that they've written, how much evidence there is, anywhere from 2 to 3 hours to write a good quality case report, because there's no sense doing the work out on the road and shortcutting a case report where we don't help our prosecutors have the best opportunity to convict people that have done some criminal acts. But I don't know of any life that has been saved, any crash that has been averted, any criminals that have been arrested, any traffickers that have been arrested, and children that have been removed from human trafficking and child predators while an officer sitting in the office doing paperwork. And really, I think we've got to make a strong push on how do we use AI and how do we integrate our videos, and not where it writes a report for an officer, because the officer, it needs to be their report, but how do we reduce the amount of administrative taskings that law enforcement officers do? Because anytime we remove a police officer from their area of responsibility, we're negatively affecting public safety. And utilizing these resources, this technology, to allow us for police officers to really reduce, if not eliminate, a lot of administrative taskings and be out there having a positive effect on public safety, is something that I don't think we're paying a lot of attention to, but I think that really needs to be a focus of leadership of all law enforcement agencies.
Well said. And Chief Bryan Rippee, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike. What an honor to be here, and thank you for the invite.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please go to policebriefing.com, where you can view all episodes. It will take you to our YouTube channel. We hope that you hit like and subscribe. And also on policebriefing.com, we reference the weekly briefing, which is my Substack that goes out every Monday morning to 1,000+ law enforcement leaders across the country and public safety professionals. You can view those Substack emails, and if you go down below, you can hit subscribe, and it will be sent to your email inbox every Monday morning. So thank you again for watching, and we hope to see you back here next week.